long before the North America we know today. Before towering cities, before politics, even before people, the continent was a vast expanse of plains, mountains, woodlands, lakes, and tundra. Roughly 9.5 million square miles of it, untouched by human beings, and ruled by strange and dangerous megafaunal animals, many of which would be unrecognizable amongst today's cast of creatures. The Americas, both north and south, were a brand new frontier for Homo sapiens, and the people who would become known as Paleo Indians, ancient ancestors of Native Americans, would be the first to conquer it. 30,000 years ago, these people entered Alaska from far eastern Siberia, crossing a now absent stretch of land known as Beringia. This is relatively new knowledge to modern humans, as it was long thought that the first North Americans were a group of humans known as the Clovis People, the subject of today's video. Characterized by their flat, tapering spear points, one group of these Paleo Indians would eventually become who we know as the Clovis People. Others would create their own cultures, such as the Folsom, Cody, and Agate Basin cultures. But it is the Clovis who are the most well-known across modern America. In today's video, we will be exploring the lives and times of the Clovis people, covering how these humans came to be, how they hunted, how they lived, and how they eventually disappeared. Join us as we travel back in time to meet some of the first North Americans, the Clovis people. Much of what we know about the Clovis people comes from the tools they left behind. Stone and bone tools that were first discovered in 1936 near the city of Clovis, New Mexico, which is how the culture first obtained its name. The culture is thought to have lasted, based on the ages of the Clovis finds, from around 11,500 BCE to 10,800 BCE, roughly between 13 and 12,000 years ago. Evidence of the Clovis culture can be found across much of North America, encompassing almost all of what is now the United States, the southern reaches of Canada, and the northern reaches of Mexico, with a particular center around the eastern United States. It is thought that some Clovis artifacts are even known from the northern coasts of South America. Hundreds of Clovis sites are known across the Clovis people's range, and over 10,000 individual artifacts are known to science to date. The most common artifacts unearthed from the Clovis people are known as Clovis points, intentionally manufactured spearheads and other tools that are typically made of flint, carved stone, animal bone, or even ivory. These points are very distinctive, fluted on both sides and tapering to form a point at the tip of the tool. Whilst the tools are all distinctly similar, they have caused some controversy in archaeologists who believe that the vast expanse of Clovis points does not represent a widespread range of the culture. Those first Clovis points discovered in New Mexico were particularly interesting at the time they were found, due to the fact that they were made of the bones of extinct megafauna. Several species of mammoth and bison were killed in making their tools, and their bones would go on to form their points. Amidst the points were discovered stone blades, cutting tools made from stone flakes and a blade core. At other sites, different materials were used in the production of Clovis points, chert and obsidian to name a few, depending upon availability. Whilst the site in New Mexico was the first instance of Clovis people discoveries found by modern humans, it was not the oldest. That honor goes to a site in Mexico known as El Fin del Mundo, translating to World's End, in Sonora. Discovered in 2007, it is thought to have dated back to over 13,000 years ago and is closely associated with the remains of gomphotheres, long extinct relatives of modern-day elephants that roamed North America when our ancestors first arrived. The most important thing to note about how the Clovis people lived is that they were nomadic and were for the entire period they existed across the Americas. Instead of settling down and forming distinct settlements, they moved from place to place, likely dependent on the seasons and where the best hunting grounds were from time to time. As a result of this, archaeologists don't have much to go on in the way of Clovis settlements, and few artifacts have been found that can be attributed to them outside of stone and bone tools. Organic products such as clothes and structures are therefore extremely rare. From the little evidence known to science, the Clovis people, when migrating, would temporarily settle in makeshift structures such as tents or lean-to shelters, as well as caves. This would provide basic shelter from the elements and would allow them to keep a base of sorts when hunting and gathering. There is, however, evidence that these temporary camps may have had basic water control and irrigation systems, digging wells so they could settle away from naturally occurring water sources. The Clovis people, like the ancient humans before and after them, were omnivores, with a focus on hunting and gathering to make complex meals. Based on the locations of their tools and the kinds of animal bones that were used to make them, archaeologists and paleontologists can infer that the Clovis people favored open habitats, such as grasslands and plains, where they could pursue large grazing and browsing animals that relied on such regions of the Americas. Many of the large herbivores known to live on the North American plains would have been fair game for them, and we'll discuss those in greater detail in the next segment, but these people weren't fussy. When given the opportunity, they would hunt much smaller game, including rabbits, small carnivores, fish, and birds. Over 120 different species of plant are known to have been utilized by the Clovis people for food or in crafting, including trees, flowering plants, nuts, roots, and fruit. It was a classic hunter-gatherer setup, where nomadic groups would split their time between foraging for plants and hunting game for meat and furs. To this date, only one instance of human burial associated with the Clovis people has been confirmed by archaeologists. The buried remains belonged to an infant boy and were found in what is now Montana. Nicknamed Onzik 1, scientists have undertaken extensive study into the boy's DNA and have been able to discern that the Clovis people were very closely related to modern-day Native American peoples, leading geneticists to believe that they were the direct ancestors of many Native American cultures across the continent today. The burial site in question appears to have been a temporary Clovis settlement, as over 100 stone artifacts were discovered in close proximity. Many of these stone tools, as well as the bones themselves, were stained red with ochre, which could indicate that the people who buried the boy held religious or funerary beliefs. It is thought that the boy was only between the ages of 1 and 2 when he died, but the exact cause of death has not been determined. The Clovis people were an incredibly well-traveled culture and inhabited huge ranges across much of North America and some parts of northern South America. Across this massive area, they would have encountered a vast range of habitats, flora, and fauna, and much of the latter would have been strikingly different to the North America we know today. The Clovis people favored wide-open grasslands and plains, but as they traveled and settled in different areas, they would have explored all the dramatic environments and landscapes the Americas have to offer. Winters would have seen them exploring vast stretches of seemingly endless white snowfields, with frozen forests and lakes covered in ice. As the weather warmed and the land once again turned green, animal migrations may have propelled them across the continent in search of food and furs. Hot deserts would have given way to towering mountains and alpine regions, whilst the Clovis people living in the southern and eastern regions of North America would have experienced sweltering hot swamps and temperate woodlands. Crossing the land bridge between North and South America in what is today Mexico and the countries of Central America would have proven more dramatic still as the temperate world turned tropical and rainforests began to permeate Clovis territory. Across this range, forests, both coniferous and deciduous, would have provided untold amounts of resources and food, with the range of plants and fruits available to them changing drastically as they traveled further south towards South America. Perhaps the most spectacular feature of the environments the Clovis people inhabited were the animals that thrived in huge numbers across their range. All of the animals present in North America today could be found in stable populations at the time, which meant that the landscape was teeming with deer, wolves, bears, bison, birds, and fish, amongst many other species. The cardinals and blue jays familiar to modern Americans would have fluttered around the ancient forests, whilst raccoons, skunks, and opossums scurried and clamored far beneath them. Missing from the modern world, however, are the colossal megafaunal animals that the Clovis people relied upon for food, clothing, and other resources. Several species of mammoth, most commonly the giant Columbian mammoth, would have gathered in herds across the plains, proving both an opportunity and a threat to the Clovis people, depending how prepared they were for a challenging hunt. Distant relatives of the mammoths could be found here too, in the mastodons, smaller, hairy species of proboscidean that were characterized by their sloping foreheads and curved tusks that faced upwards. Extinct species of bison, larger than the modern-day American bison, would have roamed the grasslands and were actively hunted by the Clovis people, whilst tapirs and prehistoric horses perhaps proved less of a hunting challenge. Colossal camels, such as the now extinct camelops, would have been hunted for their meat and furs, whilst the most spectacular and unfamiliar Pleistocene animal of all, the giant ground sloths, ambled around in the forests and grassland verges. This was a hazardous environment, however, and powerful carnivores would have been plentiful in the plains, caves, and woodlands inhabited by the Clovis people. Wolves and bears, the very same species familiar to modern Americans, would have caused problems for unwary travelers, whilst mountain lions and jaguars proved an ever-present threat. Moreover, saber-toothed cats were present in the Americas while the Clovis people were settling, including the infamous Smilodon, amongst the largest and most infamous of its kind. Cave bears would have been terrifying encounters for humans seeking natural shelter from the elements, while alligators and snakes lurked in the swamps and wetlands, ready to strike at the last moment. Clovis culture was known in the Americas until around 10,800 BCE, at which point the number of known artifacts begins to significantly decline. This is direct evidence for the decline of Clovis culture. The most common theory as to why this happened was that the megafauna began to disappear. Mammoths, ground sloths, giant camels, and mastodons began to disappear across the world, both hunted to extinction and forced out of their habitats by the warming climate. As a result, humans needed to change their lifestyles to suit the altered world. From this point, humans became more sedentary rather than nomadic, settling down in communities where they would cultivate crops and eventually farm animals, rather than chase migrations across the continent. You can see the development in the nature of the artifacts discovered by archaeologists. Clovis points were eventually phased out in favor of new technologies. The Clovis people were eventually replaced by new cultures that effectively went their own way and adopted new ways of living. The Folsom, Suwannee, Cumberland, Redstone, and Simpson cultures, along with others, began to crop up across North America, who would eventually blossom into hundreds of individual cultures and traditions of their own. Therefore, the Clovis people did not vanish, but their culture rather developed and split up into new derivations. The Clovis people are the direct ancestors of all Native American cultures alive today. Millions of people can trace their ancestral family trees back to these spectacular hunters of mammoths and mastodons. So that was a rundown of the culture, life, and eventual disappearance of the Clovis culture, from its beginnings in Beringia to its eventual spread across much of North America. Whilst the specifics of Clovis life are difficult to discern on account of much of the organic matter from nomadic people being lost to the depths of time, hopefully we will be able to paint a much clearer picture of how these human beings lived when further discoveries are made. The fact that one Clovis burial has been discovered means there are likely many more out there waiting to be unearthed. And from those, we can learn a lot about what it meant to be an early North American, surviving in a hostile world filled with harsh elements, dramatic landscapes, and deadly predators.